Hi everybody, and thank you very much for joining us again on the TKC channel. If you like what you're going to see, tell us down below. Click like. If you don't like it, hit dislike. Please subscribe, follow us, listen to what we've got to say. If you want to get involved, leave some comments. If you want to really rant at us, by all means send us an email through one of our websites. The links for them are down below in the description. And bear in mind, we are developing all the board games as software. Have a little look at tkcdigital.com and see what we've got to say there. Again, the link is down below. If you want to get involved, let us know. Bob, I'm sure, would be delighted to get another brain to rub it up against. This evening, we're joined by Geoff, and he and I are going to have a little chat about a couple of different things, but primarily, what is an armoured cruiser and what's the difference between one of them and a heavy cruiser? It's something which I've never quite understood the distinction myself. It's not my thing. I'm more World War II than World War I. And hopefully Geoff can shed a little bit of light on these things. So Geoff, what exactly is an armoured cruiser other than what appears to me to be a failed pre-dreadnought battleship design?
Well, in a way, you've kind of knocked it on the head. It is effectively, it's faster than anything that is stronger, stronger than anything that is faster. It should be capable of trapping or, in certain cases, running down commerce raiders. It should be capable of undertaking a certain amount of commerce raiding itself. Most famously would be the deployment of the Edgar class cruisers in the 10th Cruiser Blockading Squadron in World War I, however temporarily. And at the same time, though, when you look at how the armor belt of certain armored cruisers can be quite similar to pre-dreadnoughts at times, but also the fact that it's a period where the 6-inch gun is seen as the primary weapon of a capital ship, because 12-inch guns, though useful, take quite a long time to fire, one shot every 5 minutes. They can also potentially stay in the same area as a battleship and live to tell the tale. So I would say that they are a sort of a precursor to the battlecruiser. And the only reason they are seen as this failed design is that the battlecruiser and the dreadnought just leaps ahead with better turbines, so they're faster and can carry more armor. And the 12-inch gun becomes more powerful and more useful. So you put that on a battlecruiser.
Yeah, I was just having a quick look at the last of the American armored cruisers. The Montana or the Tennessee class, I think they were, which eventually end up essentially being battleship names at some point, I believe, or at least are slated to be that later on in life. I'm not sure they ever got built. They may have been some of the ships cancelled as a result of the Washington Naval Treaty. All of that I was looking at there was quite clear. These are 20+ knot ships. They've got couple of big cannon in the front and the stern. And then you go and take a look at Lexington class battle cruisers, which have roughly the same armor, but are dramatically bigger ships. Instead of being, 15, 20,000 ton ships, they are 43,500 ton ships, 33 knots in theory, and 16-inch guns times 8, and you can see there's a design jump between the armored cruisers and then the later treaty cruisers, which look like scaled down battleships, but are really not armoured to any great level. In fact, reading about the American Navy's attempts at heavy cruisers is it's a bit embarrassing, to be honest, if you're reading about it. Because unlike everybody else, they actually seem to have bothered to obey the rules. The Royal Navy obeyed the rules, by the way, guys, up to a certain point, and then they realised that everybody else was taking the mickey. And reading what deadweight tonnage and dry tonnage was in a totally different way to the way the West had, or the two big navies had. And there is a rapid increase in the amount of armour on British ships. It's very noticeable with the Town class light cruisers. And they're only light because they carry 6-inch guns, not 8-inch guns. That became the defining change between the wars as to what a heavy cruiser has 8-inch. Light cruisers 6 or smaller inch guns. Before you get your minds in the sewer, people, I'm talking about guns, not anything else. Ladies, you're not going to be happy at that. I get that, but these things happen. So the reality of it is that many of these ships were not proof against their own guns. And if you take a look at the defining point of naval armoring, my understanding has always been that the ship was meant to be proof against the biggest gun that you carry on your own ship, because you fight like for like in theory. The reality is, of course, that's not how it works at all. You know, if you're unlucky and you come up against, I don't know, the Graf Spee, he's got 11-inch guns and you're armoured against 6-inch. It's not a whole hell of a lot of use, you know. So, see these armoured cruisers, did they actually, and I know at Tsushima they were very effective, as with the pre-dreadnoughts there. However, and actually, you know, on both sides they did reasonably well, because a fair number of the Russian ships survived Tsushima and were captured and seemed to be used by the Japanese. Was there a case to be made that this put a couple of big guns thing was maybe progressed more by the Axis power, certainly by Germany, into the Deutschland class so-called pocket battleships? 6 11-inch guns, a bunch of 5.9s.
Yeah, I can see a certain amount of development. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I do sometimes. There are moments where the reason why I argue that an armored cruiser and a battle cruiser are very, very closely related. I try not to get too lost into what type of cruiser is that, what type of cruiser is that, because the whole pocket battleship thing. The Germans, I think the Germans, was it Panzerschiff? They literally called theirs armored cruisers in the original German for the Deutschland. You know, there just comes a point where there's why have so many different types of classification? Just call the damn thing a heavy cruiser. In retrospect, there you go. It's not simple. Don't faff around.
Yeah. Yeah. To be fair, the Germans do actually reclassify the Deutschland class as heavy cruisers. You're quite correct. It's Panzerschiff. And if you take a look, you know, fairly small number, really big guns, lots of small ones, and kind of looks just like an armored cruiser. And the armored cruiser to me is that kind of, it's not, it really shouldn't be in a battle line, particularly against a dreadnought.
No.
You know, especially once the dreadnoughts are lobbing 13.5-inch, 15-inch, and 14-inch and 16-inch shells about, they aren't going to last long. Cruisers don't last long in that environment. And to be fair, it could be argued that many of the battle cruisers designs didn't do particularly well later on in life when confronted with that level of firepower. I could point at Hood, which might be a bit unfair on Hood, to be fair. She is very well armoured by battle cruiser standards. You could point certainly at the 2 Japanese Congos that had a bad experience off of Guadalcanal. And they had been heavily upgraded to so-called fast battleship standard. And that's something we maybe want to look at, Geoff, in a future thing. For those of you who don't know much about the Japanese Navy, we could take a little chat about where it came from, how it developed, and what their principles of combat were, because they are a bit different to most of the other navies from what I can tell, especially by the time World War II comes around. Interestingly enough, it might also be worth our while taking a look at aircraft carrier designs and trying to discuss which ones we think were viable carriers had they survived or had they been commissioned. Because there are a number of ships that are sunk very early on due to stupidity or incompetence. And there's a number of ships, particularly in the Axis side, that were never commissioned. And even if they were commissioned, were never really in a position to do anything other than skulk up a bay somewhere and get sunk by carrier aircraft in 1945. So we could have a look at that. If you guys actually have something you want us to talk about, send us an email, put a comment down below. I'm sure Geoff and I can find a book about it, or we can sit and, you know, have a couple of beers one evening, have a chat before we speak to you guys, have a phone conversation, put something together. So what you're essentially saying is armoured cruisers are effectively what the heavy cruiser becomes, something which protects commerce, can raid commerce, can theoretically project naval power, and ideally at least stand against the battle fleet long enough for your own big stuff to catch up, which starts to sound very like the idea of the battle cruiser as well.
Well, this is the thing, because if you go a pre-dreadnought with 6-inch guns and an armor cruiser with 6-inch guns, they sort of go head to head, and then the armor cruiser sees if it can survive. Then you can look at Jutland. You've got, I know, Lion Tiger going up against, I know, König or Großer Kurfürst, and they've both got 12-inch guns or 30.5, whatever. Have a go at each other, see who survives. So really, to be perfectly honest, the armored cruiser sort of bifurcates. I wouldn't call it obsolete. It just simply, what kind of armored cruiser do you want? Do you want a heavy cruiser with 8-inch guns, minimal armor, or the battle cruiser with battleship grade weapons and armor? Something that needs to be knocked on the head. Battle cruisers could be very, very durable. Lion, or was it Tiger, at Jutland took some like 15 hits and came out.
Yeah. I think the problem we have when people hear the word battle cruiser is a loss of Hood, and it's a loss of the 3 battle cruisers at Jutland.
Yeah.
But the Jutland ones, as far as I'm aware, is largely down to incompetence.
Cordite everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's clear incompetence that the Admiral commanding was pushing for something and they decided to cut a corner, which is incredibly dangerous. The loss of Hood, we know that she had an additional twin 4.5-inch turret put in right in front. In other words, forward of X turret. They did that at Gibraltar in a hell of a rush because she was being used to escort Art Royal a lot at the time. And they needed more AA power. Now, the ship was not designed to have a bloody great hole cut through the armour deck to put that turret in. The armour deck was not penetrated forward, and she was hit several times forward by 8-inch and 15-inch shells. Apparently, examination of the wreck does show where these things hit, and they basically bounced off. You know, there was nothing much wrong with her armour plan that way, but aft, which is where the explosion that killed her seems to have started. There is a dispute. There may have been a penetrating hit into her torpedo tubes, but there's a lot of argument amongst the Hood Association people that actually her torpedoes been taken off, or some of them, most of them have been taken off, because they were in a fixed mount, and by that point, by 1941, these things were seen as anachronistic and didn't really work. Interestingly enough, Rodney then fired her forward ones at Bismarck and may actually have torpedoed Bismarck later on in the chase, to be honest, but that's a whole other argument. But the reality of it is Hood was designed essentially as a very heavily armoured, fast, theoretically a battle cruiser, but realistically it's a stretched Queen Elizabeth design with more power and very close to an all-or-nothing armour plan. Her bows and her stern were barely protected. I don't even think she'd shrapnel protection right up front and right aft. But the important bits of her, the bits in the middle, were heavily protected. After Jutland, there was a partial redesign of the armour plan, and she went ahead with that. The other 3 ships of her class were just cancelled. No one wanted, after Jutland, to be associated with this type of ship. She got additional armour again in the 1920s, but none of these were full-blown rebuilds on the scale that Warspite, Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, Repulse and Renown got. Yeah, the net result of that was she always was seen by the Navy as a battle cruiser, not a fast battleship. They knew she had problems with her armour plan, and there are 3, they aren't really what-ifs. The Royal Navy had booked her in for what they call a major repair, or a large repair. And what that essentially means is take everything from deck level up, take it off the ship. So that's her 15-inch turrets, it's all the secondary armament, it's the superstructure, it's the funnels. That gets you access to her engines. So the engines were going to be ripped out of Hood and replaced with the engines which were being designed for the World War II Lion class battleships. So she would have got a power upgrade with much less weight than she was carrying for previously existing engines. It's interesting to note that the engines slated for Hood went into Vanguard, because the people who were going to do this repair for Hood were the people who built her at John Brown's, and they were the people who built Vanguard. and they'd already ordered the engines. They were actually sat in Glasgow waiting to get put on the ship when she came in at the end of March 1941. Obviously, she blew up just before that, so that never happened. But the big argument is what we'd have done in terms of repair. Now, the original plan was to match a KGV's armament with 5.25-inch secondaries. So I have 8 turrets for them, have the big block bridge, and have a whole bunch of point defence cannon on her, pom-poms and 20mm cannons. It's likely that she would have got 4.5 inches, same as Renown, because we're making a lot of them, to be honest. She would have looked kind of like Renown. And she was essentially going to get a rearmoring, particularly over the magazines, and that turret, which had been plugged in at Jib, was the first thing they were going to get rid of. They were going to reinstate the armour, because they knew it was a problem. And there's some comparatively strong evidence that the thing that blew her up was a penetrating hit through the very weak armour and the barbette of that new turret that had been plugged in aft. And if that had been done, there's a good chance she would have survived. And then perhaps with a fully functional Hood and a partially functional Prince of Wales, it's entirely possible that Bismarck wouldn't have got that much further into the Atlantic, which would be a fantastic what if to examine. Would it be possible that Hitler might actually have said, well, enough of this Navy crap in 1941, rather than waiting till 43 to lose his temper with them for losing ships in the surface? So just a wee bit of background there as to what they were doing to Hood. But there's clear evidence as well when you really go in and revise opinions and try and approach the ship without the, oh, she blew up, so she's rubbish. There's clear evidence that she was a fast battleship and was never a battle cruiser. You know, and I love this idea of the armoured cruiser concept coming back full circle to where I started. I'm quite good at that. I love this idea of the split, going heavier and going lighter, and with similar roles, but one is obviously part of the battle line, one is to go and find the battle line, if you like. That's really interesting. Did these armoured cruisers carry torpedoes?
Ooh, I think some did, yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because that tends to suggest that they are designed for a little bit more than just sitting in a battle line trying to fight like for like. I mean, torpedoes are used for all kinds of interesting things.
6 torpedoes.
Interesting. Right, that's very interesting. So they did that. You see, the Germans put them on their Panzerschleife after the war, the 3 pocket battleships. Interestingly enough, the Americans omitted torpedoes from most of their heavy cruisers. And if they were commissioned with them, they were taken off. Apparently, you didn't need torpedoes on a cruiser. I understand that the Battle of Savo Island disabused Americans of that notion in a real hurry because the Japanese left torpedoes in their cruisers. And that had quite disastrous consequences in a number of night engagements for the US fleet, which again might be a topic for us to really look at, is some of these, frankly, chaotic battles in the South Pacific at night, and try and make head or tail of why the Japanese kept hammering the Americans. But I'm not going to get into that. I have some pretty strong views in that.
We could possibly link that with the British versus the Italians in the Mediterranean as well.
Yeah, that's a slaughter. That's an absolute slaughter for an extended period. I think the Italians really win 2, maybe 3 engagements out of about 50 across the Mediterranean. I mean, it's disastrous for the Italian Navy. And that one there is a statistic that you really want to take a look at. Now, the South Pacific ends up a draw. But the Americans can afford a draw, the Japanese can't. The Japanese have to win virtually every single engagement, and draws are no use because, or an overall draw is no use when you're on the reverse side of the building program, and when the Americans are building much better ships to plug in to replace losses. That then becomes a massive problem for the Japanese, which is why I'm thinking, looking at the other thing we want to talk about is aircraft carriers. I think that'd be really useful because there's a sea changing capability for the US Navy after the loss of Yorktown, Hornet, Wasp, and Lexington with the arrival of the Essex class. And that might go into, you know, if these ships here hadn't been sunk, what would have happened? Would these things still have been, you know, the varsity, if you like? The other thing I would love to talk about sometimes, and guys, if you're interested in me chuntering on about stuff about the British, I can do that. I would actually like to talk about what the British carrier program would have looked like had the atomic bombs not ended the Second World War.
Something Malta class.
Yeah, 3 Audacious, 4 Maltas, and 24 light carriers. You know, plus the remnants of the I class. That starts to look like a real navy to me by 1946 standards. You know, you're getting close to something that is really huge and very powerful. The other thing that we need to start talking about, Jeffrey, in another meeting, we'll knock this one in the head fairly quickly, guys, because I think you're probably all sick of hearing us talking now. Jeff, we need to have a wee chat about aircraft in World War I.
Yep, good fun.
And I think we should do that maybe over 2 different programs. Take a look at one at the naval implications of it, because you've told me that the Grand Fleet ended up with up to 300 planes floating about on, you know, various ships there.
I'll find that book. Yes.
Yeah, and take a look at the land-based air power, and maybe get into a wee chat about that and see. Bearing in mind the last video I was saying it shouldn't be too bad up to a certain point. After that, we probably have to look at it. So it would be really useful to see where we're going to go with that, and get a feel for the people out there for what to expect in one of the TFWW titles. So, armored cruisers. Anything else?
I can't think of anything else really. Just
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Can we see one? We can. We can go to Greece. Georgios Avarov. Yeah, that's a ship we need to go and see. So if you guys can buy some games, means that we can go and do a field trip to Piraeus and go aboard the Avarov and take a wee look at what a proper armored cruiser is. Actually, something this is deadly serious, guys. I think we're going to try as a company to do a couple of these field trips. We'll take some pictures and so on. We'll try and put them up into these videos for you if you fancy that. So we'll wait and see where that goes. What do you think, Jeff? You fancy that?
Absolutely.
For 4 days in Athens, go and see the Avarov. They've got a Fletcher-class destroyer there as well, by the way. She's relatively close to World War II standard, as I recall. And we really do need to go to Chatham to see, is it Crescent or Crusader? One of the war emergency flotillas.
One thing ships I'd love to look at would be which Churchill-class submarine is it that's down there? One of them, anyway. And that's I'd argue, and we could have a discussion about this on video, whether what SSNs count as capital ships and what count as heavy cruisers. But from a British perspective, I'd argue that the final capital ship we have managed to preserve is that particular SSN fleet submarine. Wherever it is in Portsmouth.
Well, it just goes to show how useless I am at remembering which ship's been preserved. It's actually HMS Cavalier, and she's at Royal Naval Dockyard Chatham, as was. And yeah, I mean, she actually did serve during the war. She was commissioned in November 1944, and she is the only World War II Royal Navy destroyer left. In fact, she might be the only preserved Royal Navy destroyer anywhere. I don't think there is one. HMS Caroline's a C-class cruiser. She's in Belfast. Yep. HMS Belfast, which is a town-class World War II cruiser, is in London. And now we're starting to struggle to get more World War II stuff because we scrapped it all. Yeah, look at the face. Yeah. I'm not going to say anything. He's just said everything you need to know about our stupidity as a government in this country. So, yeah, essentially, Royal Navy Museum ships So we got Belfast, Caroline, the Britannia. I've been on Royal Yacht Britannia, by the way. She's quite interesting. Warrior, HMAS Advance, attack class patrol boat. Yeah, okay, fair enough. There is, by the way, a tribal class destroyer in Canada. There's also a Flower class corvette somewhere in Canada that you can go and see. And if you happen to go to, and I think it's in Gdansk, in Poland, yes, Bliskowice is indeed in Gdynia. I thought it was Gdansk. It's actually in Gdynia, just up the coast from Gdansk. She was built in Britain and is a modified tribal class destroyer design. Very famous ship. Free Polish. Was already on the way to Britain when the war started in World War II, and she served with the Royal Navy all the way through. And she is in comparatively original condition, looking at pictures of her. I'm quite intimately aware of her history because she pops up all over the place. Really quick ship, by the way. She was used quite frequently to escort the Queens into the UK when they were coming across Atlantic carrying American servicemen to come here. So that's one that you might want to look at. There are, I'm sure the French have something. Not all of it was surrendered and not all of it was blown up. So they must have something somewhere. I just don't know where it is. I don't know much about the French Navy. That's this gentleman here's job. So, will we do the Junicol in a video? Talk about that.
At some point.
How to make a ship look like a hotel.
Oh, crikey. Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I mean, there are moments when I look at these things. I mean, I don't know if the video can pick this up, but if you look at that ship, now you see the gun turrets, and then you see the portholes.
Move a wee bit. Yeah. Nice ports right underneath it.
It's just insane. Like, you'll have battleships that look like they're from like 1815 with gun ports. It's really, really strange looking at them. Basically, you can tell a French or a Russian ship if it looks weird. If the Americans have the bridge looking like a railroad cart, caboose, well, that's American. If it looks relatively nice, it's British. If it looks very utilitarian, it's German. But if it's weird, it's just it's French. It's Russian and French.
We need to, and excuse my French, we need to find a picture that you can put up of the Puy de l'Homme, which is a French armored cruiser.
Yep.
Built in the late 1880s, early 1890s. And I have honestly never seen anything quite like it.
Let's have a look. Des Puy de l'Homme. Yes. Oh, it's so beautiful in a really weird way. I don't judge
you, really. And then you get the Porthal, 3 funnels, and I mean, but it's seriously, guys, this thing looks like it's sunk, and when they raised it, they just shoved everything on the bottom. Right? It's just weird. So we need to talk about these things. We really do. I know nothing about them.
And I'm sharing it. Can you see this? Can you see it?
That is fantastic. See what I mean? It looks kind of upside down. I presume that's meant to be a ram at the front.
I think so. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it could just be we'll do tumble home for its own sake. There just comes a point where the French are so experimental. I mean, look at the length of the barrels.
Yeah.
Doesn't that look a bit weird? A bit excessive?
I don't know about that. They're getting some muzzle velocity out of that, I would presume. And it may be that they were sort of looking at how do you penetrate things, or possibly they were aware that these things were so weak protection-wise, because all the nice windows and portholes and so on that they punched through the hull, that outranging the other guy became a thing.
Well, from what I've read, the French do seem to actually have been pretty obsessed with short-range hail of fire. That was their thing for their armored cruisers. So
and it looks just like a floating hotel, guys. You know, that kind of tells you just how silly French ship design was here. You know, I remember reading about HMS Repulsor Renown when she joined the Grand Fleet. And essentially everybody was like, oh, that's an explosion waiting to happen, because she had a row of portholes fairly low in the hull, which indicated there was no armour plate. Now, when they re-armoured between the wars, that was the first thing they sorted, by the way. This thing here, I'm just imagining even shells coming in on a fairly shallow trajectory. You're starting to get a statistic likelihood of getting a penetration straight through what appears to me to be a porthole. I presume these things have steel panels that you can, you know, shutters that are made out of, yeah. But even so, that's got to be weaker than just having a steel plate. It's just insane. You need to show us some more of these pictures. That is just absolutely bonkers.
Let's have a looky look. Let's find another one. Ship classes. Right, let's get Bouvet up. There we go. Oh no, she's
that's not that bad. I mean, she's got this tumble home thing going on.
You can see those lovely portholes though, all the way across.
The other thing is that tumble home design that she has surely is a shot trap for a relatively plunging shell.
Yeah.
Did nobody actually think that if you lob a shell at 15 degrees, 20,000 yards, it's going to be coming in at a certain angle, and it's probably going to hit that. See where the curve is, on line with the two, I guess, the sponsoon turrets and midships. That would surely just be a shell trap. Did any of these things survive when they were in combat?
Well, Bouvet took a shell, which caused some serious damage. You know, well, let's have a quick look. Look. Sinking. So survey, blah, 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 revealed that a 305mm shell from an Ottoman shore battery had struck the ship at the waterline amidships on the same side that she had struck the mine, which contributed to the fatal flooding, which caused her to rapidly capsize and sink. There you go.
Okay, yeah, so basically the design's not great. Yeah. I'm being polite. Yeah, I know that the British pre-dreadnoughts have a few flaws, particularly early ones as well, and a number of them were sunk there in the Dardanelles, as I understand it. I think there's not Sea Ocean and so on there, but the Charlemagne class, I mean, what is that? Jeez, oh.
There we are.
Just why?
Yeah, it's. I mean, this comes down to the fact that the French simply are not capable of a streamlined procurement process at this point in history. It's that simple. It's that simple. You know, I mean, there you go. I mean, all those lovely hulls. You've got that tumble home right there. They seem to have been a bit restrained on it, but it's still, you know, yeah, it's just crazy.
That's quite appalling. Yeah, this is something we probably need to talk about a bit more and try and have a look at this and maybe even go through and see what killed some of these ships in combat in War One. In War Two, to be fair, the two German pre-dreadnoughts that served Schleswig and Schleswig-Holstein did fairly well actually at the beginning of the war, and then they survived till quite late on as floating anti-aircraft batteries. I'd have to go and look. I'm pretty sure one of them at least gets sunk by airstrikes from the Allies, probably the RAF, because we tended to be kind of brutal towards the German Navy by that point. But there we have it. There's a little look at some of the insanities of French shipbuilding. Thank you very much, everybody. Tune in again soon. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope some of what we've been talking about been of interest. If it's not, let us know. If you liked it, guess what? Get down there, press like, subscribe. Even if you didn't like it, subscribe so you can shout at us some more. Have a wonderful time. Have a great week coming. And we'll catch you again next time. Goodbye.